All right, welcome to VP Culture. This is the course on creating culture where we explore the various components of what makes a great culture in your organization. This is Lesson 3, Culture Current. So what is a culture? It is the emotional current that pushes people to behave and think in similar ways. So there are emotional forces that are present in every team and are created by every team and every leader within that organization. So in every culture, there's this sense of push or pull. That is, the energy comes from feeling valued or not feeling valued. In fact, if we're unintentional with our culture and what we're doing when we're leading, it generally leads to hiding and self-protection. However, if we are intentional and follow the principles of VP culture, we're tapping into powerful intrinsic forces that are involved in being valued that will lead to a greater sense of community and a greater sense of collective positive actions. So science reveals that there are intrinsic forces involved in optimal culture that we will explore here in this lesson. So what VP culture actually is an optimal culture. It's an intentional blueprint for you to plan your culture around. It'll give you step-by-step skills and knowledge in order to be able to practice this as leaders and create teams and whole organizations that will be creating a positive culture around valuing people, using the energy of valuing people to create a positive culture. Okay, so the first component that we're going to talk about in VP culture is personality science. Now, in this intentional blueprint, personality science is the first intentional step that we're going to take you down in order to create greater sense of connection between people. When people are led towards their personality, it reduces conflict greatly within teams because people feel known and understood. And it also increases their engagement with the leader of their team by over 70%. So personality science is the first step that we take down this pathway towards our optimal culture. And then next, we're going to be focusing our optimal culture of VP culture on emotional science. Now, emotional science is the effective emotional communication between the team and the leader and everyone on the team. When this is done effective, you're going to start to feel more trust. You're going to start to experience higher levels of candor and honesty, which leads to innovation, productivity, and resilience on your team. It's one of the #1 forces of team productivity, according to surveys from Google and from Harvard. So the next practice we're going to talk about in our optimal culture is value science. And value science is the ability to create valuable services, objects on a creational level, and then experiences like trust, harmony, peace, joy, nobility, and wisdom, which are the forces of nature, the forces of relationship that create value. A deep dive into these values that choose us and exist in our world are important to help us understand how to value others. So it's going to be these 3 sections, which are separate courses here, that follow up on this culture course that dive deep into these 3 sections: personality science, emotional science, and values science. And now we're going to take a look at a story that kind of illustrates this point of how to create this cultural current that we've been talking about. So let's take a trip to the Outlaw Platoon, which was deployed in Afghanistan, and it was led by Sean Parnell. And he was the leader of this platoon that was one day pinned down by a marauding group of Taliban that had come down and had them pinned down under heavy fire. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and they were running low on ammunition. And they were in a perilous situation. They could have died at any point in time. And then Sean Parnell, who never led from behind, sent his guys out to do something that he wouldn't do himself. He saw an opening. There was a reloading of the heavy machine gun that had them pinned down. And so he ran out himself, yelling and screaming with his rifle as he charged the wall. And he got to the wall without getting shot. And then he himself lobbed a hand grenade over the wall and silenced the gun. And then he jumped over the wall and there was shooting, and the whole platoon went to help him out, to help save him from the Taliban that were over on the other side of that wall. And when they got there, many of the Taliban had already been eliminated. So we all followed him behind that wall, and we went and helped him clear out that compound. But we didn't find him till he was way in the back of that compound with his smoking gun and his rifle. And he said, "Okay, boys, it's time to go home." And that's why Sean Parnell was the glue of this entire platoon. In fact, they called themselves a brotherhood, not just a platoon, because what Sean did was he made sure that everyone felt valued. He didn't do anything that he wouldn't do himself. He didn't risk the lives of his men. He risked his own life. And everyone knew and everyone felt that he was there for them. And that created a current of valuing and of purpose within that organization, within this little team, that held them together and made them into really an unstoppable force in Afghanistan. So it's a similar pattern, not as dramatic as us. We don't have to assault an enemy, but we have to work together. We have to have leaders that we trust and that hold us together with valuing, so that everyone on that team, on your team, feels valued. And it's a reciprocal energy of, as Sean made them feel valuable, they made him feel valuable. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we enter into the next segment about the science behind the culture current. All right, let's talk a little bit about the science behind the culture current. Now, according to Dr. Gordon Neufeld, the relationship between leader and team member is very critical. When there's what he calls in attachment science, some sort of a bond, a relational bond created by valuing, people naturally follow. We naturally follow the people that we feel valued by and what we call in attachment science, attached to. So that would be like a parent and a child. But in many cases in the workplace, it's leader and team. And when that dynamic is felt, and the steps of valuing that we'll get into later, like personality science, emotional science, and value science are lived out, then the following becomes very natural. In fact, there are brain regions in our mind. The anterior cingulate is a brain region that lights up when we are doing things that are accepted by the team. And when all those norms within our teams are how we value each other, then that reinforces it, that part of the brain. And then there's the dorsal cingulate that reinforces you've violated a norm within your group. So it's very important that the brain keeps track of these things. And we'll see that it's actually powered by our friend serotonin that we learned about last time. Serotonin is actually the powerful force that illuminates these brain regions and helps us to figure out where we stand in our social circles. Are we valued within those social circles? And when we are, the serotonin, which we mentioned is high in the leader, will start to affect the levels of serotonin of everyone on the team, and then reciprocates back in a virtuous circle that we've been talking about to the other members of the team. So it's this win-win cycle when you have this level of what we call social affiliation and valuing and connection that's happening. It's not about being a tyrant leader. It's about being a connecting leader, a valuing leader, a socially affiliated leader that starts to create this virtuous circle. And that circle of valuing each other is powered by serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter and a chemical within the brain that we talked about last time. So that's the science that we see happening in our brains behind this whole cultural current situation, that we're wired as human beings to have cultures and have teams and operate within them in very powerful ways. And when they work well, we thrive as human beings. That's the science behind the cultural current. And now we're going to dive into some discussion questions. Let's look at these discussion questions. Number one, how do different groups' culture current make you feel? So how would you feel on a softball team? How do you feel at a civic group? How do you feel at a church group? How do you feel at a work group? Think about past groups in your life that you've been a part of that have had different cultures. Have you been on a team that felt negative? Maybe there was a classroom that felt negative. Maybe there was one that felt really positive. That team, that coach, that was great. So talk a little bit about how different groups that you've been in have had a cultural current, and how did that make you feel? All right, let's look at this next question. Is there a person in your life who creates an emotional current of value? And how do they do that? So is there somebody in your life that values you and creates this virtuous circle that we were talking about, where you feel valued and you value them, and you could tell it's a life-giving relationship for you? Talk a little bit about that. All right, let's jump into this third question now. When you walk into situations, how can you bring positive valuing current to those who are around you? So are you reciprocating back value? Are you creating it on your own? Talk about how you can do that. What are some things that you've noticed that work when you enter a group to bring a positive valuing current that you create yourself? Talk about that for a little bit. So now we've reached the end of the culture current section of this course, and it is the third lesson in the culture science course. And in this course, we learned about how culture acts like a current that moves us along towards being valued, or, heaven forbid, moves us away because we feel not valued. So using the power of valuing creates a powerful current that we move along through.